and welcome to Smeg and the Femmes, a podcast to discuss Red Dwarf from a different perspective. I'm Emily, and today I'll be talking about Series 5, Episode 1, Holoship, with the help of my guest, Feline Ranger. So, welcome back, Feline Ranger.
Hello again.
Yep, nice to have you back. Okay, so just the Series 5 in general. It's actually my very favourite series of Red Dwarf. I mean, I know that's a pretty popular opinion, but one of the reasons for that is how dark it often is, both sort of literally and metaphorically. But of course, Holoship is kind of the odd one out there. I mean, both thematically and in the sense that this episode is very brightly lit compared to the rest of Series 5.
Yeah, there's a lot of Series 5 you have to squint at. It's like someone really did turn down the lights. And I think especially, coming off...
Episodes are all mostly really darkly lit, but this one, there's all this sparkling white Holoship sets, and it's a very interesting contrast.
And you really notice the difference coming off the back of Series 4, which is actually, in contrast, very brightly lit, isn't it? With, the white officers' quarters, and yeah, it's all actually sort of very bright compared to Series 5, where everything kind of got taken out of the living areas, didn't it? And they spend a lot of the time kind of running around dark corridors and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I did notice. I mean, Holoship is definitely the episode. I mean, despite the fact that we have a title, Holoship. I mean, the other characters who aren't Rimmer spend a lot of time on Red Dwarf, the ship, and then for the rest of Series 5, apart from a brief. Apart from a brief bit at the beginning of Terraform, there really isn't much time that the crew spend on Red Dwarf. I mean, I know they do get stuck by Rimmer in quarantine on the ship, but they don't get very much chance in Series 5 to just sort of chill out and relax on Red Dwarf the ship. They spend most of the time either on Starbuck or racing around dark corridors, as you said.
It's even funnier if you try and imagine that the entirety of Series 5 just takes place within a week, and it's just this really bad week that they've had.
That'd be so funny. I mean, I've seen various theories about Series 5 and also about Holoship. I mean, I remember there was one person who had a theory that Holoship was Rimmer's dream entirely, that he just fell asleep while watching a romantic film and dreamed the entire thing, which, I mean, I don't think that's what happened. But I mean, I could see why somebody would have that theory, because it's so sort of utterly closed off, not just from the rest of Series 5, but from the rest of the entire series. I mean, he never even mentions Nirvana again. I mean, and obviously you can say, well, that's because for sentimental reasons, and I would believe that, but it's odd how very, very separate this episode is from the entire rest of the show.
And I mean, the whole thing as well, that a lot of what Holoship is about is very much male fantasy, isn't it? That it does kind of, the idea that it's all in Rimmer's head does kind of check out.
Doesn't it? I mean, I'm not necessarily saying I actually believe it, or at least that it was meant to be that. But you can make a very, very, very good case for it. You really can. I mean, especially since we later get on to the Holoship's rules about sex, which again, as somebody else pointed out the other day, is very much sort of male fantasy kind of areas. Let me see. Okay, better get to the episode itself. Although I could talk about Series 5 all day, really, but let's focus in on the Holoship itself. And of course, we get the opening scene, which is them, the crew, all on Starbuck, watching the romantic film, and it's. I just sort of sit there and go, or at least they're just openly weeping without any embarrassment in front of his crewmates. It's so cute.
Kind of a masterclass, isn't it, in how to establish character without anyone actually speaking.
Yeah, it's brilliant, I mean, the way they just pan across all the different expressions, Crichton just sort of a bit bemused and but politely watching, Lister a complete emotional wreck. Kathy's just, what the hell is going on? And Rimmer is
just bemused.
And Rimmer is, of course, completely contemptuous.
Of course, Kat at this point is still thinking, what happened to the ducks?
Yeah, that's so funny. Although I did notice, of course, Rimmer goes off on a huge, rant about I consider it an insult to my backside that it was forced to sit growing carbuncles. Nobody forced you to sit there and watch the whole film, Rimmer.
Yeah. I mean, my immediate thought on rewatching it with, Rimmer kind of going off on one immediately was it's a little bit in there of the lady doth protest too much, isn't it?
Really is because he could have gone into the cockpit and chatted to Holly. Well, I say chatted more like ordered Holly about, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, it's like he could have done literally anything else, but he stayed and watched with everybody else.
Yeah, so I think that subconsciously means, that whether he likes it or not, he does prefer having the company of the others, even though they're also very different, I do like the way Crichton is. He's really trying to be. He doesn't quite, and he doesn't understand why Lister's so upset, but he's visibly trying to be supportive and emotional, and trying to be sort of human, I suppose, and it's cute.
I mean, let's be honest here. Lister's reaction is in some ways as extreme as Rimmer's.
It is, yeah, because I am a woman, and I have never cried that much at any film or TV program, So
I
yeah,
think I would tell a lie. I think probably when I was 14, probably the first time I saw Titanic in the cinema, I was probably Lister equivalent. But hormones.
yeah. I think it's something to do with the way I was brought up. I certainly, have probably, sort of sniffed slightly and repressed a tear, at the occasional sad thing I've watched, but I don't go sort of, boo hoo, with if there are people around. It's just not me.
I've got worse as I've got older because I used to make fun of my mother all the time because she used to cry at everything, and now as I've got older, I suddenly find myself welling up at stuff, and I'm like, oh geez.
Yeah, well, I suppose that could be a question. You've become less self conscious as you've got older. In which case that's probably a good thing.
Maybe with this particular scene, I think it is interesting in terms of what you said about series 5 being darker in sort of every way, in the fact that actually someone has turned the lights off, but also that pretty much every episode has quite dark themes to it. And even with Holoship, as you say, where it is a more sentimental episode, that the underlying themes of it are still quite dark, aren't they? It's about sacrifice, and it's about, not unrequited love, but I guess unsuccessful love, and, the ones that got away and all that stuff. There's still quite a dark undertone
Yeah.
to it.
Yeah. Yeah. Also, I do kind of think that Lister is probably using, he's probably kind of I'm not saying his emotions aren't genuine, but I think he's kind of using the film as an excuse, to cry, whereas he wouldn't, cry for, if he wanted to cry, and there wasn't a film around, he wouldn't do it in front of his crewmates, I don't think. But the film is giving him a cover, so to speak.
Yeah. Although, of course, we do see, don't we? Is it in? Yeah, I think it's in series 1, isn't it? Where he's watching the Suppy movie all by himself and like crying away into his milkshake.
Yeah, it's cute, but I suppose what I mean is, when he's feeling depressed and wants to cry, he might put a weepy on as a cover, as opposed to so he can say, well, I'm crying because of this film, not because I'm depressed, But yeah, it's just a sort of little headcanon of mine, which you can agree or disagree with, basically.
A little bit of catharsis there for him.
I think personally, yes. Yeah, and of course, as you said, Cat's reaction, is just sort of classic. He liked the cartoon at the start, and then he lost interest.
And I have to say as well, I have to give a shout out to Cat's jacket in this episode.
Yeah,
Big 80s disco ball jacket. I just love it. I would wear that.
yeah, it's stunning, isn't it? He wears so many stunning outfits, But this one is particularly, outstanding. I mean, obviously, it's
Yeah.
not an episode which is particularly heavy on cat content, but I do like the sort of running gag. Well, I say running gag, they only use it twice, they don't overdo it. A superlative suggestion, sir, but we don't have any defensive shields. I love that gag.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of become one of the sort of the iconic ones, hasn't it? Along with like the light bulb gag and
Yeah.
the Space Corps directives. Is that whole thing with there are just two minor drawbacks.
Yes, I like the way they don't overdo it. They do it twice, and sort of cat, and the second time cat sort of cuts them off. Oh, all right, all right, and then I think it's definitely better that they don't sort of beat it into the ground.
No, but yeah, so I think that's definitely one of the sort of the classics.
Oh yes, definitely. Well, I mean, of course, Series 5. I mean, it's kind of hard to find anyone who doesn't agree that Series 5 is an outstanding series. So it's just so good. Right. Okay. Okay. So Oh yes. And also although Holly isn't given a sort of scripted reaction to the film. I love the way we see Hattie, and she's got this boring exposition line, but she's still sort of crying from the film. It's just such a lovely little touch for her to put in.
Just had that little sniff, doesn't she?
Yeah, and that was not in the script. That was Hattie, adding to
Yeah.
the performance. I mean, I just like it. And it's another of those things. That of course Norman wouldn't have had to do that kind of thing because he had so much more material in the first place. But I mean, again, I can't imagine Norman doing that kind of thing. So it's just nice. I mean, I enjoy noticing all the way Hattie sort of acts, constantly acting in the background, even when they don't give her any lines. It's just
I think they call that in the business bigging up your part.
exactly, yeah. It's admirable, because obviously we know that they let her go at the end of the series, which is all very sad. But I mean, at least she tried her very best to the end. It's not her fault that they couldn't think of any decent material for her. It's their fault basically.
Yeah, no, kudos to Hattie for actually managing to sort of put more into the character than the writers did.
Of course, Cat gets this wonderful gag. They encounter the Holoship. Sir, they've taken Mr. Riddler. Quick, let's get out of here before they bring him back.
Actually, one of my favourite lines ever. It's just
That is a classic line. It really is. But
it's so perfect, isn't it, for Cat, and just says so much about that whole kind of interplay between the characters, and it's just so funny the way it's just boom out of nowhere. Like,
I mean, it's interesting actually. I mean, because this is obviously very much a River-centric episode and is remembered as such. But I mean, all the other characters, they still get good material, So excellent material, which we'll get onto later. So I mean, again, that underlines what a good series 5 is, because I mean, it was still giving everybody, well, apart from Holly, decent material. Yeah, okay, so moving on to the Holoship itself, and of course we're introduced to Nirvana, and great performance by Jane Horrocks. I really can't praise her enough. I mean, she really makes her such a vivid character. I mean, on paper, she's just kind of a sort of very posh, detached character, but somehow, the acting makes her come across as very human, in my opinion.
yeah, no, I absolutely love Jane Horrocks in this. I think she looks so stunning, doesn't she, with like that red beehive and
Yeah,
the
yeah.
character that she created with it, just so kind of elegant and that I don't know what kind of accent that's supposed to be that she's come up with, but it's great. Is the it's
Yeah,
entire ship.
I haven't actually heard her normal voice, but apparently it's very, very northern and completely unlike Nirvana's sort of very sort of posh accent. So
Oh yeah, so like if anyone who's listening ever used to watch Ab Fab, she was in that as Jennifer Saunders' assistant Bubble with this very broad Yorkshire accent, which is like her normal voice. So yeah, hearing her as Nirvana with this sort of very clipped sort of Liz Hurley sort of voice is just so different from her normal speaking voice.
it's really an amazing accent because you would swear that she was born with that accent. You really would. And also
Yeah.
I noticed. She's also. I know the Hollow crew are supposed to be very stuck up and stuff, but she's friendly to him immediately. I mean, she doesn't sort of. I mean, we see when he meets Platini, and Platini goes, "Oh, it's an old Class 2 hologram," and immediately looks down on him. But Nirvana, she just sort of treats him, like a normal, fellow hologram. She doesn't sort of look down on him at all.
I do wonder what her position was on the ship in terms of rank. I mean, I know they say that everyone on the ship is sort of highly qualified and Top Gun, all that, but obviously the people who Rimmer meets on the bridge.
Is Commander Crane, and I think Pushkin and Navarro were also commanders. I mean, I did wonder whether everyone apart from the captain was a commander, but then at the end, Rimmer is a navigation officer. So I don't know. Maybe you get to choose your rank.
I'm just thinking that those people he meets on the bridge of Platini and Pushkin and Navarro are maybe the very top brass, which is why they're a bit snobby, and she's maybe further down that ranking, which is why she's a bit friendlier.
I get the impression, to be honest, that rank is in order of IQ. I mean, given the way they all introduce themselves, and Platini's got the highest IQ, I always kind of thought that rank must be in order of IQ.
Yeah, and I do wonder, as I was saying, like if her, especially there's that thing, isn't there, that maybe it's that whole thing of that when Stocky chooses her to be Rimmer's opponent, it's not just because of like the emotional thing that Stocky knows that she's more emotional and likely to drop out, but actually maybe she does have a lower IQ than a lot of other people on the ship, which again is maybe why she's less arrogant.
That might be it. I mean, she wouldn't necessarily need to have the lowest IQ, because I mean, if she's just sort of in the lower ranks and combine that with her emotional connection to Rimmer, I mean, that would probably be enough to make her his best chance of success. And even then, he still has a 96% probability of failure. I know in the background when Pushkin says that, Navarro just sort of smirks,
I wish we'd seen a bit more of Stocky.
They really are very, very sort of stuck up, but in a kind of amusing way. I mean, you can't really take them too seriously.
Yeah, I wish we'd seen a bit more of Stocky. I wish like Stocky had a bit more of a personality, like Holly.
Yeah, that would have been interesting. I mean, I don't know. They could have had someone wearing enormous glasses or something. I mean, just to sort of fit the intellectual theme.
So it would have been funny because obviously when they had, Holly being super smart in Whitehall, they did like the slicked back hair, didn't they?
Yes. I mean, they could have, they could easily have come up with something, to denote, super intelligent. It wouldn't have been that difficult. But then again, I mean, I suppose they had so many guest actors already that they probably didn't want to fork out on somebody else for Stocky.
And of course, this episode notoriously ran long anyway, didn't it? They had to cut a lot out as it was. So,
yeah, I mean, I did. I mean, as I said, I carefully watched the deleted scenes because there's a whole 12 minutes of them. So I mean, and it is kind of a shame that they had to cut out so much, because I mean, not all of it is essential to the episode by any means. I mean, and the episode does work without it, but really do get if they'd left everything in, you would have got more of a sense of the relationship between Rimmer and Nirvana. It would have come across as more convincing, in my opinion.
Yeah, definitely. I think that is kind of the only major flaw really with the episode. And it's not really a flaw, that's probably too strong a word, but it's just we're kind of meant to assume that they've developed this incredible bond in like the 2 hours that they've known each other.
I know, in romantic films, which this is obviously parodying, I mean, often, that kind of thing happens, but usually, even in those kind of films, you get a bit longer than a couple of hours, Usually, at least
it's just like within that sort of 30-minute time frame, it just doesn't feel kind of long enough for it to be.
I did want to, sort of address. Of course, I suppose we should probably first say the whole thing of deleted scenes. I mean, question of whether or not you consider deleted scenes canon. I have to admit, when it comes to that, I'm a shameless hypocrite. Basically, if I like the deleted scene, it's canon, and if I don't, it isn't.
No, I'm the same. I think that's a good interpretation. of it. It's rule of funny and rule of, well, I like it, so there.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's fair enough. I mean, yeah, because I'm pretty sure a lot of people have the same approach. Obviously the deleted scenes, in the episode itself, it just cuts straight from do you want to have sex, and then post-coital in her bedroom, and whereas in the deleted scenes we see her sort of dragging him to a bedroom. I do want to say, I don't think for one moment, that the sex they had wasn't consensual. But it does show him as a lot more reluctant and needing a lot more persuasion than in the actual episode.
He's not feeling prepared, is he? He hasn't done his research.
Basically, I think he's terrified of making an idiot of himself. He's afraid. He's probably afraid that he'll come too soon.
Yeah, he's just afraid he's going to mess the whole thing up, isn't he? And that she's going to go and tell everybody else, and just the whole thing's going to be a massive humiliation.
Yeah, yeah. Of course, it's still the topic of women's sexuality. I kind of go back and forth on it. Sometimes I think that he's totally gay and he's just very, very, very oppressed, and sometimes I think he's bisexual. And the one thing I do not think he is heterosexual, because I'm sorry, no, he isn't.
It's very vague within canon, isn't it? And I've sort of was thinking about obviously the same sort of things when sort of looking back on this episode. And I know a lot of people sort of headcanon Rimmer also as asexual.
Actually,
there's that bit in Marooned, isn't there, where he's saying about, well, I was never really very highly sexed, and he was more interested in the car than the girl, and all this stuff. And I think I quite like that about the character, that it is open to interpretation that way, and that it's not just kind of very straightforward. I mean, I know the writers probably think they've written him as a very straightforward straight man, but to anybody who doesn't sort of, fall within that kind of sexual binary, actually, I think Rimmer is a character. It's very easy to read in other ways.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. You could just as easily read him as asexual, based on this episode, to be honest. Because how do I put this? Chris and Jane Horrocks are obviously very good actors, and they do. They do very, very well with what they're given, and it's not exactly that I don't find it convincing. It's more, how do I put it, there's something very chaste about the whole thing.
I think it's one of those things that if you weren't a fan and you didn't know the character's background, it's almost more convincing if you don't know much about Rimmer as a character. But when you do know a lot about the character and you kind of know everything that's kind of going on sort of behind the scenes with the character, then I think it's a lot easier to kind of go, this feels sort of not, as I say, not unconvincing, but you kind of understand that there's a complexity to it that you might not get if you're just watching it as a casual viewer who just sees Rimmer as a normal straight guy and all those things, and doesn't know all the kind of neuroses behind it.
Yeah, it's interesting actually, because I have seen people who aren't into shipping at all talking and saying that when they watched the Holoship deleted scenes, they found the relationship between Rimmer and Nirvana more convincing than in the broadcast episode. So it's not just us who kind of felt that in the broadcast episode, it's still comes across well because the actors are so good. But there's something very sort of, given that they're supposed to be having sort of a wild sexual affair, it just doesn't come across that way.
My personal kind of headcanon as such is that I think there's too much in the show. There's too much evidence in the show that Rimmer does have some kind of heterosexual attraction to women to just headcanon him as completely gay. I think he does like women, but I think within sort of certain boundaries almost. And the way I thought about it, which is going to sound very bizarre, I think Rimmer's relationship to women is very similar to my relationship to fish. In that, I don't dislike fish, and I can enjoy a nice meal of salmon with new potatoes and be like, yeah, that was a really nice meal. But I can't get that excited about fish, It's never, not what I would ever choose if it was on the menu, but if someone serves me a really nice dish of, that's been sort of well cooked, I'm like, oh yeah, I really enjoyed that.
It's interesting you put that because I mean that is kind of Rimmer's attitude to being offered sex by Nirvana. I mean before the panic kicks in. I mean it's kind of well it's on offer. Yeah. I mean yeah. I mean like I said I mean
Sorry, did I make it weird?
I say I mean I mean I'm not massively attached to the Rimmer is totally gay thing. I mean, I mean, I can be convinced, but I mean, I think as you say, there is also arguments for him being bisexual. But I mean, basically, I mean, as long as people aren't trying to tell me, that he's not interested in men at all, then I'm not going to start arguing. That's it.
But yeah, as I say, getting back to the original point is that this whole sort of intense relationship between Rimmer and Nirvana is difficult to pull off within a 30-minute episode. But given the time constraints that they had, I think they made it work as well as they could have done.
I mean, I do. I mean, it does. It is a very good episode, and it does work. I mean, I suppose you could say part of the chasteness is because they're parodying weepies, which obviously would all focus on the romantic over the sexual, and probably wouldn't show sex and that kind of thing. So I mean, yeah, well, yeah, of course, there was a fact, that they never even kiss, which is a little bit odd, considering it's a 90s sitcom. I mean, men and women were allowed to kiss.
I have a theory, which is that, as you say, it's a very chaste episode in many ways, and we don't see kind of anything really between them, not even a kiss. And I do wonder if that was a kind of intentional thing, because obviously the whole thing with the Holoship mentality is constant guilt-free sex. And the whole idea that their connection actually, when it happens, isn't sexual, that it is romantic, is maybe, what they're getting at there. That
Yeah,
although it's a sexual encounter that kind of brings them together.
With we don't pay compliments. Maybe they don't kiss either. I mean, that might be it. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's the whole thing, isn't it, that she's used to sex being very emotionless, and
Yeah,
that
they even
it's only because he
talk to
brings
yeah.
meaning to that sexual encounter by making it emotional that becomes it's the emotion that becomes more important than the sexual encounter itself.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I can understand it. I mean, it does kind of make sense. That Nirvana would sort of react the way she does because she's used to just sex just being exercise.
I mean, I'm not sure how I would react to a man screaming out Geronimo, but I don't know if it would make me fall instantly in love, but then who knows? Change my mind, internet. Change my mind.
He said that as he was about to come because I mean, I can't imagine when else he would have said it. But I mean, why Geronimo?
Oh,
Anyway, we should probably move on a little bit. We did sort of skip over the conversation in the lift where it's established they have this sort of health rule to have sex twice a day, etc. And the way Rimmer's sort of blinking in sort of incredulously. It's funny because he puts on an act of being, oh, this is my wildest dreams, but he's clearly pretty scared, really.
yeah, and I think as well there's that sense of shock initially, isn't there? As well, that there's obviously no kind of moral implications of the promiscuity that he's obviously been brought up with.
Yeah, I can't blame it because even now, obviously we still get people falling in love. I mean, it's maybe a bit less shocking than it would be to viewers 30 years ago, but I mean, it's still not the norm for most viewers now either. So I mean, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And she really sells that line, doesn't she? About the constant guilt-free sex.
Yeah, I know. I love the way she, carefully enunciates that, sort of right in his face, and then he just sort of blinks, But, really, 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 really well acted. I did notice though. She says, "Well, what do you do when you want to have sex on Red Dwarf?" And he says, "Well, we go for runs." Like he was doing constantly in series 1 and 2.
Yes, that's a very good point. Yeah. I hadn't noticed that, but no, you're very right.
It's just honestly, it's very amusing, funny actually because could have answered it in a completely different way. She says, "Well, what do you do when you want to have sex?" I mean, he could have said, "Well, it's physically impossible for me to have sex because I'm the only soft light hologram on the dwarf." Or he could have said, "Well, all my crewmates are men," And then what he actually says is, I mean, some people, sad, lonely people, find that people just aren't attracted to them in that kind of way.
Yeah, I mean, for Rimmer, the dry spell has been longer than his passing on, hasn't it? Let's be honest.
Yes, it has definitely, yeah. I mean, it's just so amusing. I mean, he had kind of ready-made answers up his sleeve, and then he just comes up with that. It's funny. Let me see.
I did think I did think as well it's interesting when we get the kind of call back to that scene later on in the sleeping quarters with, Crichton saying, am I the only one who finds this just a bit tacky? And then it sort of cuts to that reaction of Cat and Lister just like frozen, just
Yeah,
kind of imagining. But actually, taking away from that, that yes, it's a comedy and it's meant to be funny and it's just a joke, but taking it that little bit more seriously, if we can imagine putting Lister into that situation, do we imagine he would actually be any more comfortable with it than Rimmer? And I actually don't think he would.
now you mention it. Yeah, I mean, I mean, Lister is, I mean, someone who likes sex, and I don't think he would be, turned off necessarily if a man propositioned to me even, but I think he would feel, the obligation, to do it twice a day, and the way it's frowned upon, to turn anybody down. I think, yeah, now you mention it, I don't think he would be particularly comfortable with it either. Mm.
I think Lister would struggle with there being kind of that emotional barrier in place.
Yeah, the bit where you can't you're not supposed to compliment people, and the implication that maybe they don't even kiss. I mean, Melissa is a very sort of touchy feely, affectionate kind of person. So I mean, if he was having sex with someone, it would be sort of naturally and that come naturally to him. Sort of be physically affectionate. I mean, before and after. And so I mean, yeah, I think. You mentioned it. I mean, I never thought about how Lister would fare, but yeah, I mean,
I think Lister would be okay with the idea of casual sex, but I think the idea of treating sex as something like, tennis, as they say, I think he would struggle with that.
yeah, I agree. I mean, that might be okay. I mean, possibly. I mean,
Yeah, Cat would be fine.
yeah, yeah. Once he got over the men as well thing, which I don't think would be as difficult as some people might think. I mean, I don't think it'd be that much of an issue for Cat, to be honest. But yeah.
No, I think when you look at Camille and his ideal mate being himself, I think actually Cat could be fairly flexible in that department.
Yeah, I mean, probably the best way to describe Cat is probably pansexual. It's just you never get to see it because he so rarely has any opportunities.
I think Cat is self-sexual.
Yes, that is probably the best way of putting it. And yeah, yeah, I do want to make the point of course, that the bit where Crichton says beautiful, brilliant women twice daily on demand. That is very obviously Crichton's assumption because Nirvana does not specify heterosexual sex only at any stage.
No, no.
If you think about it, that they're holograms. They can do whatever they like for the rest of eternity. I mean, they're not going to confine themselves, to one gender, are they? I mean, it's just not happening.
No risk of disease or pregnancy.
Exactly, no risk of disease or pregnancy. I mean, I find it impossible to believe, that everybody on that holoship, have any problem, with sleeping with the same gender. I mean, it's just. I mean, if you're going to establish a setup like that, you can't expect us to believe that it's only heterosexual sex.
So you'd get bored after a while, wouldn't you?
Exactly. I mean, even if you started out, only being interested in one gender, you'd get bored after a while. I mean, of course, if you think about it too much, there are kind of sort of potential consent issues, But I mean, really, it's just a fantasy, and it's all so sort of sanitized '90s kind of sitcom thing that it doesn't really bother me, to be honest.
No. You're not supposed to sort of think about it as seriously as some of us do.
Yeah, you definitely could, write, do angsty stuff with it, But I mean, that's not what the show is doing, So fair enough. Right. Okay. We mustn't forget the scene back we get back on Starbug with Lister and Commander Banks, because that's a wonderful scene.
Yeah, no, again, that's just sort of one of those ones that's sort of gone down in Red Dwarf history, hasn't it? One of the things I love about this scene is that it's not just the scene that's gone down in history, but the smeg up related to it as well, with Craig eating the cigarette. It's like, what are you doing?
Why did I eat that effing cigarette?
Yeah. But no, it's a really great scene, and just that back and forth, and yeah, just the way that he plays it, as it's so kind of playful but threatening at the same time. Walks that really sort of thin line there, and I think it's just fabulous. And Don Warrington as well, with that so kind of disdainful tone in his voice.
Oh, I mean, Don is great here. I mean, of course, we should probably point out for people who aren't British that Don Warrington is a big name in the UK, and has been for a long time. I mean, when he appeared in this episode, he was already famous for having been in Rising Damp, So I mean, they were really getting the famous guest stars for this one.
And stage as well. He's done a lot of theatre, hasn't he?
Yeah, and of course I believe he's still currently appearing in Death in Paradise as well. So he's had a long, successful career.
He's legit, darling.
Yep, legit. Yeah, and it's just of course, it's just so perfect. The way I mean, the utter contrast between them. Banks is all sort of Holoship snooty and up himself, and Lister has got all this attitude. And I love the way he says "spoiling for a rumble," with about 5 R's.
Milks it, doesn't he?
Really, really, really does. I did notice though that we both of these episodes, this one and the next one we're covering, antagonists call Lister fat. There's a theme developing.
Yeah, I know. Harsh.
Oh yeah, I mean, every time he takes that leather jacket off, he is obviously not fat. I mean, come on.
I mean, this has been like a kind of a recurring thing, hasn't it? Sort of throughout the whole of the show, really.
It goes all the way back to
series 1 or 2 when Rimmer calls him buffoon-bellied, and the whole of Body Swap. Yeah, torturing Craig about his weight is kind of like a Red Dwarf staple at this point, isn't it?
Yes, yeah. I mean, it was just his bad luck to star with two ridiculously slim men. Obviously, I mean Chris and Danny. I mean, not that Robert is exactly overweight either. It's just unfortunate, that he's the shortest, and by contrast, he looks slightly chubby. But I mean, he's not really.
It's all about the chubby cheeks, isn't it? It's the gerbil-faced dormouse cheeks, that just that
Definitely,
round,
it is definitely
feasible face.
The chubby cheeks, yes.
Poor thing.
Also, it's kind of odd, that Banks, says that that they might recommend Lister for the museum, because I mean, Lister's not a hologram. How would they get him onto the Enlightenment?
Yeah, no, that's a thorny thing. I wonder if he actually meant, or again, that was just like sort of a veiled threat, just sort of having a bit of a pop. But yeah, no, that's a very good point.
It could have been sort of veiled insult, because I mean it really doesn't make any sense that Lister would be able to board the Enlightenment. Right. Okay. So moving back briefly to Captain Patini and Co. I mean, I didn't. I mean, just briefly. I mean, I did notice in the deleted scenes, Platini is a lot more over the top than he's in the episode.
Yeah, I think again they cut quite a lot out, didn't they? And we don't actually get an awful lot of him
Tone it
in
down a
the.
bit, maybe.
Yeah, maybe, but again, I think just without the time to sort of flesh that character out, they just had to sort of go with what they had in those bits that they kept in. But yeah, I like in the commentaries when Hattie says about he's very good with the props, isn't he? And ever since I heard her say that, I can't stop noticing it.
Yeah, he did like fiddling with that colour plastic stuff, didn't he?
Sort of very genteelly sipping from the teacup.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I did like the way the whole all three of them, while Rim is talking to them, they're still doing their work and clearly only half listening. It's another great way of getting across how arrogant they are.
I'd like to give a shout out as well to Natalina Pushkin's accent.
Yes, I mean,
Like that's a hell of an accent she's got.
it's a good accent because I mean, obviously, it wasn't a natural accent given the way the crew complimented it and stuff. But yeah, interesting that both she and
She committed.
hives.
Yeah, but no, she committed to that accent, and I commend her.
Sorry, say that again.
She committed to that accent, and I commend her for it.
Yeah, definitely. It's kind of interesting, that she and Navarro have sort of beehive hairdos, and then Platini and Navarro have sort of, well, it's almost ace hairdos.
Yeah, that sort of 60s beehive thing, obviously, whether it was Robin Doug or Howard, maybe, who just saw that as the epitome of elegance.
Guess so. Yeah, he probably wanted to sort of give sort of very sort of vague echoes of Star Trek as far as the women were concerned. I suppose. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. It could be a sort of a nod to the Ahura beehive. Yeah.
Yeah. It could be. Yeah. I do think it works. It does make them look sort of very sort of classy and sort of unusual looking.
I was going to say the Holoship uniforms as well. I know there's controversy that some people like them and some people don't. I do like them. I think they're great.
No, actually, I think they do work. I mean, make the way they sort of have the sort of very sort of fancy material, and sort of clingy velour, and the way the H's have circles around them. I mean, I think it does work to make it, to give the impression of a very sort of fancy, high class hologram ship.
And I know some people have said, that the sort of the clingy velour jumpsuits aren't very practical, but they're holograms. They don't need to pee. So, like, they don't have to be, difficult to get undone at short notice.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, in fact, later on we see Rimmer just sort of, dress himself, automatically. So I mean, presumably the Hollow crew can do that as well. They probably don't even need to bother, with that. They can probably just vanish them in a second if they want.
Yeah, so, practicality isn't an issue, is it, for them? But yeah, I'm going to stick my neck out and say I like the Holoship uniform.
I mean, I quite like them actually because I mean, they kind of go with Rimmer's sort of reddish greenish outfit. It's sort of kind of aesthetically pleasing. They match quite well. So yeah. Oh,
And one thing as well, I just wanted to bring up before, because I'm running low on time, aren't we? But
yeah,
one thing I just found really interesting is when Rimmer comes back from sort of realizing that his opponent has withdrawn, he's not elated. You'd think he'd be like, "Oh my God, this has happened, and it's the last thing I expect. Dream has come true." But actually, he's very subdued.
Yeah, I mean that is interesting, isn't it? I mean,
And I know it's maybe meant to be just shock, but
at that stage, he doesn't realise that it's because Nirvana has sacrificed himself for him. So he thinks he's, not only going to get on the new ship, he's going to be she's going to be around as well. So I mean, you'd think he'd be elated, but it's clearly dawning on him that, hey, do I actually want to leave the crew after all?
yeah, the reality of it is hitting him, isn't he? Of the responsibility, I guess, that he's going to be taking on and all those other things, but.
Presumably, also the real.
From my perspective, I do like to think that there is that emotional thing of when he realizes he's actually got to leave. That he comes up with that "people I met" speech, but
Yeah, I was going to say that leads nicely into the people I met speech, which of course is a classic sort of insult, a very very funny gag. What is Mister sort of doing in the background? Though, sort of doing this sort of macho pose.
Yeah, because I sort of thought the same thing. And actually, again, this is a very sort of slightly out of character for Lister, isn't it? He always seems to be sort of very deliberately sort of turned away, like he doesn't care. And his parting words to Rimmer are just the "see you, Smeged." And there is a sense, really, of kind of resentment there, isn't it? And I don't know if it's sort of resentment that he's leaving or just resentment about the constant guilt-free sex, but it's
Yeah, it is. Yeah,
yeah, his attitude is surprisingly chilly for Lister.
it is. Yeah. It is, yeah. I mean, there's an interesting expression on his face when he says see you, Smeghead," I mean, it's not sort of malicious, but it's kind of inscrutable, so he doesn't want to, display too much emotion.
You can read all sorts into that scene, I think, the way that they play it.
Yeah, I think you can. I mean, of course, I mean, if you fast forward to a much, much later scene when they have a similar situation in Skipper and they think Rimmer's going. Lister doesn't react there at all because it's clearly blindingly obvious to him that Rimmer is going to be back pretty damn soon. But he probably thinks that he is actually going for good, So it's the emotional stakes are higher, I suppose.
Yeah, and of course, again, you contrast that with the scene in Stoke Mere Clipper when Rimmer does actually leave to become Ace.
Yeah,
When they give each other a big hug and it's very warm, opposed to this where he's sort of as you say sort of basically almost turned away from him, isn't he? Like not really wanting to engage.
I don't blame him. I mean, he's no doubt feeling abandoned. I mean, of course, I mean, obviously, earlier in the episode, Rua's gone on this rant. I want to be with officers, people who count. So I mean, that's pretty rude to your crewmates. So you can't blame Lister for being annoyed.
Yeah, so yeah, maybe there's a little bit of that, but I mean that's not new, is it? He's
I don't.
very aware
I mean,
of how
so
Rimmer views
it's one
him
thing,
in
being
that sense. Yeah.
constantly insulted. It's another if your crewmate is actually leaving you. I mean, this is kind of going back a bit, but Rimmer does mention, that his father, or at least the person he thought was his father, had 4 strokes, and he says I did that to him, me, So I mean, he. That's pretty, bad. Rimmer literally thinks that he gave his father strokes. I mean, it's just tragic, really.
I mean, this is seen really as one of the sort of the seminal episodes in terms of Rimmer's character, isn't it? And for good reason. We're kind of seeing him here at some of his worst and his best as well. But yeah, this is kind of seen as the turning point, isn't it? Where Nirvana vocalizes that underneath all that neurotic mess, there's someone nice trying to get out. It's one of the only times in the series, not the only time, but one of the only times when we
Yeah, I
see
mean,
him actually come good on that, and he
yeah.
does actually make the right decision and do the right thing.
Yeah, I mean that is a good point. And as you were saying that, I mean, it occurred to me that you could argue that Lister kind of does that, does a similar thing to Nirvana in Stoke Be a Clipper, except obviously he doesn't say it quite so. I mean, in fact, if I remember correctly, he uses reverse psychology instead. But I mean, he's doing the same thing. He's just doing it in a less sort of romantic way, I suppose.
And I mean, I think it sort of goes without saying that if you look at the character of Rimmer as he was in the early series, that the Rimmer that we see in series 2, for example, or even probably in series 4, he has that thing about the Captain Scott and all of
Yes,
that,
of course. Yeah.
and yeah, the behaviour that we see from Rimmer and the decision that he makes in this episode, I think, are very much a result of having spent 5 odd years at this point locked in a room with Lister, and how that has rubbed off on him.
I
So
definitely agree. I mean, by this stage, he's sort of changed somewhat. Obviously he's nowhere near complete his journey, but he's starting to make steps, and this is a major one.
and it's interesting as well, isn't it, that it contrasts that it makes a big deal at the start of the episode of him kind of going like, no, I wouldn't, I would take the job and to hell with the woman. And then when it shows that, you know, he does still think that way and that's how he thinks he would feel, but when he is actually confronted with that situation, that actually he's like, actually, when that emotion kicks in, he's like, no, I wouldn't, and actually that isn't how I think anymore, and it's not how I feel anymore now that I've, you know, now that I'm in that situation. So it's that sense of growth of that, you know, for all that he still puts up that front, that there is more going on under the surface than even he perhaps realizes.
Oh, I definitely agree. I mean, of course, at the very end, you know, when he's giving his sort of romantic "we won't be apart, we just won't be together" monologue. Of course, because this is Red Dwarf, we have to have a Rimmer moment where he sort of suddenly grimaces and goes, "I can't believe it, I said that," you know. But he still does it, you know. He still turns and goes, you know, and resigns, you know. So I mean, it's a very sort of way to establish that he's still Rimmer, but he's kind of sort of getting there. He's making progress on his very slow journey.
Yeah, and there's a lot of Rimmer-centric episodes in this series, because obviously, you know, Terraform as well, um, and Quarantine to a certain extent.
Yeah, so I mean that was why basically that was why I was determined, you know, to get a Lister fan on the Inquisitor, because obviously that is the most definitely the most Lister centric episode of series five.
Then we get the sort of the two big ensemble pieces of Demons and Angels and Back to
I was
Reality.
thinking that too. Yes, they are definitely on ensemble pieces. Mhm. Okay, we are running a little low, but I did briefly want to mention the scene, the sort of the scene where the crew are interviewing for new holograms. It's funny.
Oh yeah,
It did occur to me.
I love that scene.
Yeah, I like that scene too. It did occur to me though that you know Harrison, the female hologram, is almost an early version of Chloe's Kochansky, isn't she?
Yeah, the horse riding and the ballet, and yes,
Yeah.
that's obviously how Rob and Doug imagine posh girls.
Yeah, you know, I mean, the actress is good. You know, she sort of rises above the sort of stereotype, you know, and gives a good performance. But I mean, it is very sort of stereotypical. What is the most unsuited possible to the crew character we could think of?
But they're so cute in that scene, aren't they? The three of them. They're just like so kind of you know, trying so hard to be winning, and
Yeah,
I'm like, oh, they're cute. I would have joined their crew.
I mean, they were very cute and endearing. It kind of upset me a bit actually because in the deleted scenes it's established you know that everybody turned them down except Lister's hologram. I mean you know I can only think that they hadn't got to Peterson yet. Of course, surely Peterson would have said yes.
Yeah, no, I reckon Peterson would have done. Yeah, Peterson would have had lower standards of
Yeah.
living that he was used to. That he wouldn't have minded that they were out 3 million years from Earth, so long as they had enough alcohol to keep him going.
You know, his first question would have been, "What's the alcohol situation like?"
Although as a hologram, actually, it probably, you know, would have made no difference because,
I
you know,
admit it. I mean,
just hologrammatic alcohol unlimited.
so yeah, I mean, Peterson would probably be all over it. You know, I mean, you know, that would be all the motivation he would have needed: unlimited alcohol.
I mean, Lister would have been dead within 3 weeks if he brought Peterson
Yes,
back,
there is that.
like alcohol poisoning. But
Peterson would not have been a good choice for Lister. Yeah, there's no denying that.
and how would Peterson have reacted to Cat as well, and vice versa?
Yeah, you know, now you meant well. I mean, I suppose Peterson does sort of technically. Well, I mean, I don't know. Does Peterson see him at all in Stasis Leak, or is he too? I mean, presumably Cat is sort of in the background as Lister approaches them, kisses them, and everything. But is he too focused on Lister to notice Cat? He probably is, I suppose. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think they officially meet.
You know, I mean, they would have they've got absolutely nothing in common, but they would probably have, you know, sort of tolerated each other for Lister's sake, I guess.
I think they would have become buds. I think they would have found some kind of common ground somewhere. I like to think so.
I like to think so too. I mean, you know, it wouldn't be sort of instant, you know, but they would have got there. Mhm. Oh, I suppose. I
I
mean,
think Peterson probably would have been fun. I think, you know, Peterson probably would have come up with like fun things to do, and Cat would like that.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I mean, yeah, I mean, I never thought about how Cat would get more pieces, but yeah, I mean, I think it would be interesting scenario. Yeah, definitely. Oh, I
Someone to add to the Durex volleyball team.
oh yes, he now that Peterson would have liked, well, once he was actually able to join in, and became a hard light hologram at least.
Probably too drunk for the unicycle polo.
I feel as though I would be going against the spirit of this podcast if I didn't at least briefly mention the very brief appearance of Sam Murray. Yeah,
Oh yeah, bless him.
I know he doesn't speak, but he's one of those characters who is arguably canonically gay. I mean, you could say he is, you could say maybe he isn't. I mean,
I think if we go by Crichton's logic that all dreams and hallucinations create parallel universes, then so do deleted scenes.
basically, yeah. I mean, for the benefit of those who don't know what I'm talking about, and I wouldn't blame you because I mean he's just he literally has no lines in this episode. But basically, if you own the series 5 DVD, leaflet the leaflets included reminds you that a series 1 deleted scene refers to Sam Murray dating Rick Feason, and obviously Sam, as we see him in Holoship, is a man. So I mean, if that scene is canon, then Sam is canonically gay, or at least canonically LGBT. So and the only reason I noticed it, to be honest, was because the Series 5 booklet went out of its way to point it out and say, possibly Red Dwarf's first gay couple, question mark, so I feel as though, I should mention it, because, it's in the spirit of this podcast.
Yeah, I don't think we get. Do we get any other canonically gay characters in Red Dwarf?
Well, human ones, not really that I can think of. Oh, yeah, we do actually. But then, well, there's the prisoner in Series 8 who takes to the idea of being cat bitch rather too quickly. It's not a good example, I know, but
Yeah, no, that's a low bar, isn't it?
that is a very low bar. I mean, of course, there are the sort of non-human ones like the Chief Beg in Entangled who wants Rimmer's lady legs. Yeah,
And I guess arguably Camille as well.
I mean, Camille does say that she's androgynous, So I mean, she can be anything to any gender to any gender, So I mean, yeah. I mean, I know that there are others that I have sort of thought about in the past that you can. I mean, of course, you could argue all day as to whether Low Rimmer counts as canon or not, but I count him as canon.
But yeah, no, shout out to Sam for being the only semi-canonical LGBT plus character in 30 years of Red Dwarf.
I mean, it's not exactly a great record, is it? I mean, I know it's not what Red Dwarf as a show is about, but it's still not a great record. And I know when I come off this, I will think of more characters because I mean, I'm sure there have been other characters that being just sort of hinted at. I mean, of course, for instance, I mean, it's all very much subtext, but I mean, you could say everybody on the Holoship, because I mean, none of them give the impression of being bothered about the gender of the people they sleep with. But of course, again, that is still technically subtext. It's not actually confirmed in the episode. So yeah.
But yes, worth noting.
It is worth noting, because it is a kind of thing which and you find interesting about Red Dwarf. So there you go. Okay, I'm just inspecting my notes for anything that we should quickly cover. Oh yeah, just very briefly. Weird painting in Nirvana's bedroom. I mean, what the hell is it supposed to be?
Abstract.
When you look at first, you think it's some kind of erotica, but it clearly isn't. It just sort of vaguely looks like it.
Yeah, no, it's. I can't say I particularly like it, but
Me neither, yeah. I mean, I think probably the idea was sort of vaguely put something vaguely that could be read as sexual in there, but not anything. But they couldn't actually put anything that was really sexual in there because that's not the kind of show that Red Dwarf is, you know. So they just sort of hinted at it, I suppose.
I know there's again in the commentaries, Craig mentions about stealing one of the paintings that's in Legion's home. So I wonder if he nicked that one too.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I do wonder who ended up with that one, you know, because I mean, okay, in itself, it's not particularly desirable, but as a Red Dwarf prop, it is desirable. We could probably make a lot of money selling it on eBay.
No, not from me though. Not my taste.
I wouldn't go for that. Wouldn't go for that. No. Hmm. Okay, I guess we should probably wrap up. We already more or less covered the ending. I think. I mean, obviously, it's a very obvious parody of the end of romantic films, and he does even quote the dialogue from the weepy that they watch at the start. You know, and I put this. I mean, it definitely works. You know, to end the episode, and you know, it works. It works whilst you're watching the episode. You know, but then when you know carry on with the rest of this series, and he never mentions Nirvana again, it's kind of odd. I mean, of course, you could say, I mean, there are a lot of things in the show that never get mentioned again, which in any realistic scenario would get mentioned again. I mean, for instance, Jim and Bexley, you know. So I don't know, maybe it's
Yeah.
odd.
Yeah. I think, you can come up with reasons as to why he would never bring it up again or why, he may have done that it just, happened off screen that we never saw it.
Yeah.
But I think it's more a case of the sort of rule of sitcom, which has always been the same with, anything even like The Simpsons, that what happens within the episode kind of lives and dies within the episode.
I mean, yeah, it is definitely a very sort of self-contained episode. I mean, like most, I mean, not all episodes of Red Dwarf are self-contained, but I mean, definitely the majority of them are, and we know, you know, that the continuity is kind of continuity. What continuity?
I think, in terms of for, long term fans, that we're meant to probably see it as that, that the effects of the episode is probably ongoing in terms of characterization and such, but there's no kind of direct sort of causality to it later on that makes it, referable to.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I mean, I think the idea is supposed to be, you know, that he remembers it, you know, but it's too painful to talk about or bring up again. So you know, it just never comes up again. You know, again like with the twins. I mean, which I guess makes sense. You know, if you don't think about it too hard. Okay.
It's towing that line, isn't it, between keeping Red Dwarf a comedy and how much to allow those kind of more tragic elements of the characterization to creep in.
Definitely, yeah. I mean, I do understand, you know, because I mean, uh, if they started, you know, taking half of the things which happen in this show seriously, it would very quickly become a tragic drama rather than a comedy. So, you know,
Yeah.
what scores would you give this episode out of 10, both overall and for slashiness?
I think probably overall I'd give it a 7.5. I'm sure there's loads of people who would give it higher, but as I say, Rimmer's not my favourite character. So although there's an awful lot about this episode that I do like and that I appreciate, it's not particularly one of my favourites.
Mm.
But I think there's a lot in here that's really funny. There's a lot of really good characterization, and again, as I said, I think it is sort of a turning point in the way that we're supposed to read Rimmer as a character, and I think that is very important.
Mm.
So yeah, I'm going to go with a 7.5. In terms of slashiness, there's not an awful lot there. I mean, there's a lot of potential if you wanted to sort of branch off from this episode, but not much actually within the the meat of the episode itself. So I'm going to go with a 5.
We've come up with very well, not identical, but similar scores. I mean, we're thinking along the same lines. I mean, flashiness, I gave it 4 out of 10, and that was mostly for the concept of the Holoship, because, like I said, I mean, there's no way there isn't sex going on there as well as straight sex, you know. But I mean, so that's mostly for the whole concept of the Holoship. And overall, I've given it 8 out of 10 because I mean I do really enjoy it. It is a very high quality episode, even though, well, like you, Rimmer is not my favourite character. I mean, I like him a lot, but as listeners probably know by now that Lister is my favourite character. So, this is probably, we're probably not the best people to review this episode, but I mean, I like to think that we've been pretty fair-minded about it, to be honest. I mean, it's a really good episode and we like it. And that wraps up this episode of Smeg and the Femmes. Thank you to Hologomet for technical help, and also thank you to my guest, Feline Ranger.
Thank you very much for having me.
And the next episode we'll be covering is Lister-centric, the Inquisitor. Hope you'll join us then. But for now, goodbye.